everyone, and welcome to another episode of The Bottom Line. I'm your host, Lauren Kalil. Our show is brought to you by Whoop. Check out the description below to join our team or sign up to get a free strap and an extra month's membership with the link in our bio. On today's show, we have Jacob Heppner and Adrian Conway here again. This time, we're discussing if this is the start of a new men's dynasty. Adrian, I want to start with you. The men's field, quite a few semifinals this season that were so stacked. Whether athletes were qualifying for the games or not, sometimes came down to a tenth of a second. And we saw a lot of shifting on the leaderboards really until the final day and sometimes even the final event. What does this say about the men's field that we will see at the CrossFit Games this year?
I think it tells us that it's going to be a great competition, and it's a great reason for people to be very excited about the way that this field has risen, like all tides, and I think that when we think about that, one of the biggest identifiers is the way that the semifinals came down to the final event, like you alluded to, but also this is just the maturity of the sport, right? And I say that primarily because on the men's and women's side, what we're starting to see is just more disparity, less physical dominance, less run away with it. And T is still the outlier that exists in our sport. But when it comes to the men specifically, it's just that as we watch the younger ranks start to take hold, and these athletes have been in the game or in a CrossFit gym since they were 9 and 10 years old, I really believe that this is just the expectation for the sport as we start to travel into the future and really look into the next generation.
And really looking at the next generation, Jacob, some of these younger athletes and rookies like the Tudor Magdas, the Dallin Peppers, punching their tickets to the games. What does this say about the depth of the men's division, not just this year, but even potentially in the next 5 to 10 years as these athletes really grow into the sport?
I mean, Adrian hit it, right? Like these kids, like, I've met Dallin and I love all these guys. All these kids are awesome. But like I have specific ties to one in the female division, and you see them start when they're 9. And so by the time they're 16 or 19 in terms of Dallin, like they've put in as much work as I have, like for my competing. Granted, I did a sport before this. And so I always tell, when I always get asked, I always tell people, like, when you watch professional sports grow, if you take a lower level, maybe second string, third string athlete from the NFL and put them back maybe 20 years ago, they would just destroy people. And my thought process applies here, where if we take like the Dallin Peppers or the Tudors or and put them back a few years ago, they would make us look so bad. But not only that, they're going to make all the records we have now of like the Fran times. I mean, some of these things are limited by just physical human capacity, but you're going to see things where you think Adrian was good, you think Jacob was good, you think Matt Frazier was good, you think Rich Froning was good. I mean, we always thought like, oh, no one's going to be better than Rich, and then along came Matt. And you see all these things happen as they go forward, and I think you're going to see just impressive, the human evolution just start happening, where people are now focusing on this sport instead of total team sports, which is of course a different discussion for another day, but I think it's going to be fun to watch.
So then both of you obviously have competed at the games. Do you guys think that this is the most competitive men's field that we've seen in the sport so far?
I think that'll change it. Go ahead, Adrian. Go ahead, bud.
To me, I will say yes. And when I again, the whole reason is there's going to be less names recognized. There's not as a grandeur of like followers that might have, a top 5. I mean, we think about historically the sport, like Jason Khalipa, Josh Bridges, Chris Spieler, Rich Froning, Graham Holmberg, Miko Salo, Tommy Hackenbrook, like guys that are like, to me, legends in the sport. And I'm sure there's some guys that I left out of that quick run by, but now we might have a little less public recognition for these individuals, but it doesn't take away from the fact that their physical capacity and the fitness that they've built, like we talked about already, from the time they were 9 and 10, and not all of them have that history. And the way that they're being led is another thing that makes it the best men's field, is that these guys all have coaches and people like us that have been there, that have done that have seen what worked, that have taken what worked and then being like, hey, listen, I used to be a real idiot and I used to do this 5 days a week. Don't do that. But we're going to do it 3 days a week. And then we're going to add in the other 2, right? And we're trying to protect this next generation from the mistakes we've made, while also pushing them onto new levels of capacity and still experimenting on them. And I think, again, my answer to you in short is yes. And it's because of the way everyone in our sport has really leveled up. One, the professionality of it, like it's a much more professional pursuit. And then two, the level of experience that these athletes already have, even at a young age.
Yeah, I mean, I think like he hit both of them on the head, right? Like you have people like us, Adrian, myself, who are now coaching athletes, where I can now say, "Hey, so let me tell you what I did wrong for 9 years. Don't do this," and they can learn from our mistakes, which is to them is just a huge benefit. But then also the opportunity in the sport, like. Rich was the first person who was like, hey, look at me. I don't have to have a full-time job. I can have maybe a part-time job, but I can focus on this full-time and look how far I can go. And then that turned into becoming the norm. And now you'll see things change in the sport as people realize new different things. Hey, I don't have to have one specific coach. I can have a hub of coaches that help me out because not one person is going to be good at coaching everything. But I think on top of that, look at like the way they qualified to get to the games. Because the way you qualify to get to the games and how they source the people that show up to the games is indicative of how competitive the games are. And so in years past, way back in the day, I don't even know if Adrian was there. It used to be just whoever showed up, right? And then it was, regionals, which was geolocated, which sometimes you had competitive fields. Like Central was always just stupid competitive, and some weren't, especially Europe. But now it's changing where now I'm not sure, again, the conversation for another day. I'm not sure how they're putting people into buckets for semifinals, but how they're doing it, I think, is smart because from the guys' perspective, I didn't see one specific semifinal that was like, wow, that is super not competitive. But I think how they get in there and who is going there, yeah, it's going to continue to be competitive. Like every year you can say, it's like if you ever watch like The Bachelorette where like, this is the most dramatic season ever in Bachelor history. Like every year you're always going to say, this is the most competitive year. And I would say every year, you're right, every single year.
So then with the field being so competitive, specifically on the men's side, where does that leave us when we're trying to predict or even guess who is going to be in the top 10 at the games? Like, who do you choose, especially when there's so many young people coming in that we don't have that much data on them?
Well, this is the beauty of it, right? That makes the analyst job and the commentating job that much more difficult. And now we're actually playing real sport, right? Previously in the history of the sport, it was relatively easy to go 1 through 8 or 1 through 10. And you might have had some shuffling within that, but you knew that 10 was set apart from the next 5 and that 5 was set apart from the next 20. But now it's really wide open. And to me, this is the beauty of the evolution of CrossFit and how now you've got to step up in the moment. And it's not just who literally is fitter because of their 2K time and their prerequisite back squat, deadlift, and press, but it's like who actually puts together that combination in this moment on a Thursday afternoon at 2:30 p.m. in a Coliseum when the lights are bright and the crowd is loud. Like that's what to me is like going to make the sport even greater as it evolves. Harder for the fanfare because they can't be like, oh yeah, we're all Frazier's, whatever his crew was called before, right? And the same with Tia. We're probably seeing, Matt Frazier would have something to say about this as he develops this next young athlete that's in waiting with Mal O'Brien, of course. He'd think that. Jacob probably thinks the same thing about his next young athlete that's coming up, right?
Oh, yeah.
But I think that the dominance is, as clearly as it's been in the past, is coming to an end where people are going to have an opportunity year in and year out to really compete for those top spots.
I think I agree with Adrian. I think anyone can be an analyst at this point by just flipping a coin, and we can just start guessing who's going to be top 10. You might have a better chance because it's so competitive. Sure, you might be able to guarantee like 2 or 3 guys at the top. But in terms of like guessing top 10, you might be better off just pulling names out of a hat sometimes because it comes down to how they show up. Hypothetically, we've had guys in the past or guys and girls who can't show up because of sickness or injury or last year's COVID or whatever, things that are outside of our control. So,
Adrian, what is your bottom line?
My bottom line is this conversation is a topic about the evolution of the sport. The men's field is stacked, but it's a byproduct of, the older athletes in our sport looking back and taking care of the new athletes and coaching them and guiding them again through the mistakes they made and, revolutionizing training methodologies and taking shots and experimenting in different ways. And I think also it's the maturation of the sport with like on the men's side as individuals, ladies side too, because we see the same, but it's, you know, we're watching these athletes. I mean, on the women's side, it's almost worse. Again, I know that's not even the topic for today, but it's like we're literally seeing these young men come into their own that were previous teen champions or previous teen competitors, and they've already got 8 or 9 years of experience. And most of us back in the day, for myself specifically, I mean, I'm punching a ticket to the CrossFit Games when I'm like 28 as an individual, and I'd only been in the sport for like 3 years prior to that, right? So very different experience than someone that's been in the game 8 or 9 years. And now they're going as an individual. Oh, but by the way, you know, Dallin Pepper already was a CrossFit Games champ 3 times and has the experience in the Coliseum and in these types of atmospheres. So I do believe it's a stout men's field. I think this is the next generation that's really starting to rise up through the ranks. And it's going to make for, you know, an exciting Madison showdown.
Jacob, what's your bottom line?
We are going to look at, me and Adrian, all of us OGs or legends or whatever you want to call us, are going to look real stupid in like 5 years. They're going to be like, oh, what you guys did? Remember when Adrian like did this? Like I beat him by like 5 minutes. I'm like, man, you're 16 and you're a female? Okay, yeah, I'm out. I think,
Exactly.
I think it's gonna be so much fun. I mean, like, the sport had to start somewhere, and now it's growing, and it's fun to see people focus on it full time and have the opportunity and the blessing to focus on it full time and to grow this sport. And so I'm super excited to see where it goes. Especially like Dallin's such a good kid, getting to hang out with them. And so I'm excited to see all these athletes get to grow up because I've known them for years and I've watched them compete as teenagers. And so, and Adrian's absolutely correct. In years past, you would say, it was always a talking point for a lot of commentators and analysts to say, oh, you know, well, that person doesn't have any experience from the individual perspective. And that might be true for Dallin from the CrossFit Games floor, but he's been out there for like, he's been competing as long as I have, just from a different perspective. And so it's going to be really fun to watch this year and to see the sport grow. And as all these, I call them kids, right? But as all these younger generation grows the sport and eventually just takes our knowledge and applies it.
Jacob, Adrian, thank you guys so much. A great conversation. I can't wait to see what happens at the games. I don't think many people are going to want to predict this one because, like you said, just put the names in the hat and start picking.